are just about to start, just 1 minute time. At 11 we'll start.
Okay.
Oyun, it's time to. Devapriya? Yes. Oyun, should we start?
Please start, Devapriya.
Sir, am I audible?
Audible, please start.
Okay, sir. Good morning, one and everyone present here. On behalf of the PG Department of English, Bakura Christian College, I, Devapriya Guho, undergraduate honors semester 6 student of the department, welcome you all to the third day of the International Web Lecture Series hosted by the Department of English, Bakura Christian College. Warm greetings and welcome to the dignitaries, faculty members, research scholars, students, and one and everyone present on the virtual platforms, either the Google Meet forum or over YouTube. We are very much honored to have among us today two eminent speakers, Dr. Indrani Dev Ma'am, Principal of Nistarini College, Purulia, and Dr. Jibu Matthew George Sir, Assistant Professor of English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Warmest welcome notes for them. Before I request Dr. Indrani Dev Ma'am to go ahead with her deliberation in the first session, may I request Dr. Narupokal Mukherjee Sir, Reader of the Department of English, Bakura Christian College, to formally introduce Dr. Indrani Dev Ma'am. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everybody present over here, and good morning, Indrani Ji.
Good morning.
Actually, I am used to calling her Indrani Ji because I started my career, fortunately enough, with my part-time service there at her college, that means Nistarini College. That was actually the beginning of my career, professional career, even though it was only a part-time job. But that was actually the beginning, and that way, whenever I go back to Nistarini College, or whenever I find someone from Nistarini College, I feel that I am at home with them. I feel honored to introduce Dr. Indrani Dev. As Devapriya has already pointed out, Dr. Indrani Dev is the principal, Nistarini College, Purulia. She has been teaching English literature in this college for more than 30 years. As I said, when I started my career, she was faculty, regular faculty there, and thereafter she joined the same college as the principal. She is the author of 4 books and more than 35 articles in various national and international books and journals. She is the editor of an internationally literary journal, Heteroglossia, which is running successfully for more than a decade. And fortunately enough, again, our faculty members, now and even before, they got their articles published from Nistarini College and through Heteroglossia. Apart from various national awards, she has also received the Best Principal Award from Bardwan University in 2010, a translation award from the Sahitya Academy, New Delhi in 2010, and the Shikha Ratna Award from the West Bengal government in 2019. She is also the patron of a registered cultural organization, Udattu. So now I would like to invite Dr. Indrani, the Principal, Mr. College, to start her deliberation. Indrani ma'am, please.
Thank you, Nadu. Today, first, very good morning to everybody, to all the teachers of Bankura Christian College and all the students, all my dear students, not only from the college but from outside also, I suppose. Today, I will speak about UNESCO's rhinoceros, the making of the image, and I shall take it that you have all read the text, because when I am speaking, I am going to take it for granted that you have all read the text, you have gone through it, you know what it is about, at least the basics. Not only that, if you have any problem in understanding anything during the presentation, or if you cannot understand a word, you want me to spell it, or you want me to repeat something, then students, you are free to ask me. I will gladly spell out any name if you want. I will repeat any book that you want, or any other matter that you want. This lecture is for the students mainly. So this is what I'm going to speak about, rhinoceros as an image. And actually, previously, before this lecture, I have already uploaded it on YouTube, a lecture on the political background of rhinoceros, which I will refer to at times during this lecture today. And if you want to know about the political background, you want to know about the political theme in rhinoceros, you are free to go to YouTube and consult that lecture also. Rhinoceros, the play, is regarded as one of the foremost representatives of absurdist drama, according to Martin Esslin, who wrote a book called Theatre of the Absurd. This play, if you already know that, I suppose, that absurdism is a movement in drama, was a movement in drama in the early 20th century, and it deals with a condition in which all, I'm just telling you in very short because my subject is not absurdist drama today, but I have to refer to it at times. It deals with a condition in which all meaning in life and all normal human communication breaks down. It is also connected very integrally with the existentialist philosophy, which was in vogue at that time. And Martin Esslin also said that Ionesco is existentialist, is a much greater existentialist even more than Sartre or Camus. So this play is an absurdist play, but absurdism is only a medium. The main idea or theme of the play is a political theme. So therefore, I will in very short tell you about the political background of the play, because if you do not know that, it is very difficult to understand the main image, that is the rhinoceros image in the play. Now, to understand the political background, we have to go back to the political history of Romania, because Ionescu was a Romanian. His father was a Romanian and his mother was a French Romanian. She was half French and she also had Jewish ancestry. This is important. During this period, that is between the wars, fascism was rampant in Europe. You know about Hitler in Germany. He was, according to most people, the most extreme fascist. But apart from Hitler in Germany, we also have other great fascist regimes throughout Europe. Like, for instance, we have Mussolini in Italy. We have Antonio de Oliveira Salazar in Portugal. We have Milan Stojannikov in Yugoslavia. We have Francisco Franco in Spain, sorry. We have other fascist regimes in Greece, in the Czech Republic, in Croatia, in Serbia, in Norway, in Hungary, even partly in England. And Romania at that time was not an exception. In Romania, the fascist Iron Guard Party, it was called the Iron Guard, or sometimes it was also called the Legion. I will refer to it as the Legion sometimes. So the Iron Guard or the Legion was founded in Romania in the year 1927 by the fascist leader Corneliu Zilia Codreanu. This regime was the most virulent and violent anti-Semitic movement in Romania at this time. As a university student, Ionescu saw one of his professors even. His professor's name was Ionescu, nee Ionescu, CU. His professor used to use his lectures to recruit students into the Legion. He was such a staunch member of the Legion. And the students actually, they were going to the Legion, they were joining the Iron Guard in hordes, particularly the student community, because they were accusing Jews of appropriating jobs. This was one of the major reasons, this job market was one of the major reasons of for the student community becoming anti-Semitic. In 1970, Ionescu, in an interview, he said that the message of the play Rhinoceros is an attack on those Romanians who joined the ideological contagion of the Legion. He called it an ideological contagion. Because why? Because most people were claiming that the Jews were illegal immigrants in Poland. Because most Romanian Jews were descendants of the Ashkenazi Jews who had moved to Romania from Poland. And in Poland, they had come from Asia. That is what the people claimed. And that is why the Iron Guard, they said that they wanted to expel, they wanted to stop the Jewish colonization of Romania. They called it the Jewish colonization of Romania by expelling all the Jews and confiscating their assets. Now, this idea was very attractive to all the university students. And you can also understand, because in this increasing anti-Semitic atmosphere in Romania in the interwar period, even being partly Jewish was enough to put Ionescu in danger. And Ionesco was partly Jewish because his mother was partly Jewish. Apart from this, one other point I will mention about Codreanu, the leader, the fascist leader. He said that he wanted a Romania without individualism. Now, this is very important. This is what I will mention when I go through the image of the rhinoceros. He wanted a Romania without individualism, where all Romanians would be united together as one country, as one people. And it sounds very nice, but it meant a wiping away of all individual ideas. And this also appealed to the younger generation. The young people believed that when Codreanu was able to create his new man, Codreanu said, I want to create a new man, the Superman. I am the Superman, and according to Nietzsche's idea of the Superman. A man who will control all other men, a man who is a leader. He called it Omal No. And he wanted to create the Superman in Romania. And he said that everybody should join this utopian society, and this kind of utopia will come into existence in Romania. Ionescu himself would not support this. And he felt that it was a way of abandoning human rights. He was for human rights. He was not for this kind of non-individualistic government. So he called it a death cult. He called the regime of Codreanu a death cult. And he felt more and more out of place in Romania because he himself clung to his humanistic values while all his friends were joining the Legion. Therefore, all the intellectuals, all the students, they were turning Nazi and fascist, and only Ionescu was humanistic. He remained humanistic alone. It is very much like the predicament of Berenger at the end of Rhinoceros. He remains the last human being in a world overrun by rhinoceroses. Now, this is in very short the political idea of the play, the political background of the play. In this political background, Ionescu wanted to express this scenario through an image, through an absurdist image. And he needed an image that would shock the audience out of its bourgeois complacence. He needed such an image. This, in fact, is the purpose behind all avant-garde theatre. And so far as you know, the kind of absurdist drama is a type of avant-garde theatre. Avant-garde, it means advance-garde, a kind of progressive theatre. I will speak about it more. So he wanted an image that would rouse the audience from its mindless apathy, and it would make the audience question the general surge towards supporting the Iron Guard. Roland Barthes, a great post-structuralist critic of the 20th century, he said of Ionescu, we are entitled, I'm quoting from Roland Barthes, he said, we are entitled to expect a great deal from a playwright who might give that new political art the deconditioning powers of the old avant-garde theatre. So this is what Roland Barthes said of Ionescu. Ionescu himself asserts that he is writing didactic anti-bourgeois drama, which is a drama of non-participation. Now, this word is very important in the type of drama written by Ionesco, a drama of non-participation, which puts a certain distance between itself and the heroes of the play. According to Ionesco, bourgeois drama is a drama in which the audience identifies itself with the characters, particularly the heroes. So therefore, the audience participates in the hero's emotions and feelings and doings also. So it is participative drama. And the avant-garde theatre is a non-participative drama. So again, he needs an apt image which will be non-bourgeois and applicable to the avant-garde style of drama, avant-garde existentialist outlook. He needed that kind of image. That is why Ionesco chooses the rhinoceros as the perfect image that would at the same time represent the fascist rise in the whole of Europe, not only in Eastern Europe, but in the whole of Europe, specifically Romania. And it would also be an image of a drama of non-participation and alienation. Now, the best reference point for the play Rhinoceros is actually Ionesco himself. He has said so much about his own play that we don't need any other critic for our reference. So, regarding this drama of non-participation or alienation, he said this: the image of the rhinoceros is directly related to the non-participative approach. He said, I'm quoting from Ionesco himself. I feel I must point out that I've been quite masterly in my avoidance of drama of participation. In fact, the heroes of my play, all except one means Berenger. All except one transform themselves in front of the public's very eyes into wild beasts, into rhinoceroses. So in front of the eyes of the audience, people are transforming into rhinoceroses. You know how Jean transformed himself. I hope my audiences will be disgusted with them. He wanted people to be disgusted with the rhinoceros. I hope my audiences will be disgusted with them. Disgust alienates more completely than anything else. Why does he want the audience to be disgusted? Because they will be alienated from the rhinoceros. And so I shall have achieved the distanciation. He doesn't use the word distancing. He uses the word distanciation of the public from the performance. So disgust is lucidity. That means his purpose, his aim is disgust, to generate disgust in the rhinoceros, in the image of the rhinoceros. Then he says a little later why he chooses the rhinoceros as his image. What is so important about the image of the rhinoceros? The characteristics of the rhinoceros. He says, I'm again reading from him. They means the rhinoceroses, they have the same mixture of ingenuousness and ferocity. They are vicious things. They would kill you without a qualm if you did not think as they do. And in the last quarter of this century, history has given us clear proof that people transformed in this way are not just like, but truly become rhinoceroses. So history has taught us that people become rhinoceroses. They do not become like rhinoceroses. They become a rhinoceros. So fascism is represented over here. Then he continues and he says, there have always been a few isolated consciences to stand against the rest of the world. So there are some isolated people who stand up and say, I will not become a rhinoceros. Like Berenger says, I will not capitulate. And represent the universal conscience. Even revolutionaries are so isolated at the start that they have a bad conscience and are not sure whether they are right or wrong. So he's saying even people who do not want to transform, they are also transforming. They are in a kind of divide in their minds about what they will do. They are heroes, he says, because they have to go through that conflict. As soon as the truth for which they have given their lives is officially accepted, there are no more heroes, only bureaucrats, craven and cautious as befits their function. That is the whole theme of the rhinoceros. This is the theme of the play according to him. That is the whole theme of rhinoceros. People who are becoming rhinoceroses and some people like Berenger who are stopping themselves, preventing themselves from becoming rhinoceroses. Now, therefore, let us sum up a little bit before we go on. What does the rhinoceros symbolize? Number one, it symbolizes fascism and the herd mentality. The herd mentality I will speak about very soon in detail. The herd mentality draws people to fascism. So the rhinoceros symbolizes fascism and the herd mentality which draws people towards fascism. Secondly, it is also a symbol of the latent evil in human beings. Evil that is. Hello?
Ananya Mondal, kindly keep yourself muted. We're distracting our speaker. Go ahead, madam.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, it symbolizes the latent evil in human beings, the evil that is inherent in human beings, that expresses itself as a wild beast. Thirdly, on the other hand, the image may allude to the fact that the human personality is actually a mask that hides the savage beast underneath. The human personality is a mask. By transforming into a rhinoceros, a person's real nature emerges out of the human mask. So it is different over here. In this respect, the rhinoceros is the reality and the human appearance is the mask. Finally, the last point. Fascism brings out the innate beastliness of human beings. And in this respect, fascism is the reality. If you impose fascism in a country, the beastliness of people begin to come out into the image of a rhinoceros. So these are the basic symbolic meanings of the image of the rhinoceros. Now let us come back and go through the play a little. I will refer to some aspects of the play which illustrate these points that I have shown. In the first act, we have 2 rhinos. If you remember, there are 2 rhinos which come in the first act. When the first rhino appears, people are astonished. But they are not so astonished as would be expected. So, what do they do when they first see a rhino going down, charging down the street? They start looking out at it and they start saying ooh and ah, lots of oohs and ahs. Some people say, oh, a rhino, oh, a rhinoceros. Most of the people continuously repeat this line, oh, a rhinoceros. But what is important is this, that some people do not bother about it too much. Berenger is so apathetic that he does not even shed his apathy and he does not show the least interest in the rhinoceros. He doesn't bother about it. Now, it is important that the rhinoceros as a symbol, it becomes meaningful not only in itself, but also in how other people react to it. So the symbol is important not only as a symbol, but also in the reactions of the people to the symbol. As such, people are not overtly disturbed at the first rhinoceros. Why? Why are they not disturbed? Because it is not doing anybody any harm. Okay, that is what they say. They are not, it is not doing anyone any harm. This is related to another theory, the theory of the harm principle in John Stuart Mill's essay on liberty. In this essay, John Stuart Mill says that individual, just take this as an important point, individual freedom should be preserved at all costs unless it harms somebody else. That means a person should be allowed to do anything he likes as long as he does not harm anybody, as long as he does not harm anybody else. That is very important. So therefore, if a fascist regime comes, then you allow the regime to do anything it likes as long as it does not harm anybody. It is the same regarding the rhinoceros. It is the same regarding the legion, that is the Iron Guard. In the beginning, the Iron Guard seemed harmless. All fascist regimes seem to be harmless. And as such, people ignore it. People start thinking that it is harmless, so let it be. People allow it to develop. And then the harm comes into action. How? The second rhinoceros. The first sign that this idea is wrong, the first sign that this idea is wrong is shown in the appearance of the second rhinoceros into that scene. The second rhinoceros is not so harmless because it kills a cat. Remember that woman with a cat? The rhinoceros tramples down the cat. The idea that our ideologies like fascism are inevitably harmful. This is the idea that fascism is inevitably always harmful. This is shown by the coming of the second rhino. And it also shows that Mill's harm principle is right over here. Because it begins showing that it is harmful It should be stopped at once, but it is not stopped, and it continues. Another aspect of the reactions of the people to the second rhinoceros. Now the people are again full of wonder and excitement. Oh, a rhinoceros, oh, a rhinoceros, they go on saying. But the second time around, they begin to debate among themselves. They start thinking. And now they are more concerned about whether the rhinoceros is unicorned or bicorned. There is a big debate raging on about whether the one-horned rhino, that is the unicorn rhino, or the two-horned rhino, which is the bicorn rhino, is Asiatic or African, and which of the two types is superior? Is the Asiatic rhino superior or the African rhino superior? The satire here is on racism. It is a racist satire because Jean, for example, the friend of Berenger, he judges superiority. He says he judges superiority by the number of horns that the rhinoceros has. Obviously, Jean is a caricature of those people who judge superiority by the color of their skin or by their race, or in our country by their caste. So, superiority depends upon the number of horns the rhinoceros has. And Jean continuously says that this is superior and that is inferior. A recurring theme in Nazi propaganda was that Jews were an Asiatic people. I told you this before, who migrated to Europe and who usurped all the jobs in the land. And they are therefore regarded as illegal immigrants. The question of illegal immigrants is very pertinent to our country also. We have been debating for a long time about illegal immigrants in our country as well. So the Jews are illegal immigrants, they are Asiatic, and therefore they are inferior. This idea has been propounded by the Nazis many times, by all fascists who are anti-Semitic. This was also very familiar to the French people. I told you that Ionesco was partly French, and later on he ran away from Romania. He escaped from Romania and he went to France. And this idea that the Jewish people are inferior, this was very familiar to the French people also during the German occupation, when the Germans occupied France in 1940 to 44. During that time, this idea was propounded in France also. The Iron Guard, they attacked all humanistic values. All humanistic values. They said that humanistic values are Jewish inventions, and therefore humanism should be rejected. And humanism will destroy Romania. Therefore, we are for Romania, and therefore we should banish all Jews. So you can understand that the question about the unicorn and the bicorn rhinoceros becomes very important over here from the racist point of view. The entire debate between unicorn and bicorn rhinoceros becomes, it attains the dimension of absurdity. When, because of the logician, the character of the logician uses syllogistic logic to explain to the grocer and the old gentleman. If you remember that first act, the second part of the first act, he explains to the grocer and the old gentleman that the same creature is born in two different places at the same time. And he previously proved that the dog is a cat. If you remember that part in the first act, the logician says, here is an example of a syllogism. The cat has 4 paws Isidore and Fricot both have 4 paws. Therefore, Isidore and Fricot are cats. And the old gentleman says, my dog has 4 paws. And the logician says, then it's a cat. So absurdist logic is brought in to show that this logic about the superiority of the unicorn or the bicorn rhinoceros is also absurd. If the logician's logic is absurd, then the other kind of logic is also absurd. This is what is proved by the entry of the logician. Now, after the first act, as the play continues, another aspect of the rhinoceros image is seen to develop. We become to another aspect which I said before, the herd mentality. In analyzing how millions of people turned towards the Nazis in Germany and the Iron Guard in Romania, Ionesco himself spoke of a collective consciousness. The phrase collective consciousness is actually the same thing as herd mentality. Botad in the play, Botad is a character in the play, and he later calls it a collective psychosis. Collective consciousness or collective psychosis. It is a mentality that compromises the human mind, the individual mind. I told you that Codreanu was against individualism. So this herd mentality or collective consciousness, this is against the individuality of a person. And Codreanu called for a Romania without individualism. Everybody would be united under one flag. In the beginning of the play, in the first act, Jean Berenger's friend, he lectures Berenger on free will and responsibility. Free will means against the collective consciousness. Free will is standing against collectivity. Free will and responsibility, and about the individual having the power to shape his own life. That is what he tells Berenger, lectures Berenger about. Like Descartes had asserted, Descartes' famous theory, I think, therefore I am. In the manner of Descartes, he lectures Berenger. Man's proof of his existence lies in his power to think. Later, in Act 2, Scene 2, even when he is transforming into a rhinoceros, Jean's transformation is very clear. When he is transforming into a rhinoceros, he continues to say, I am master of my own thoughts. My mind does not wander. I think straight. I always think straight. Ionesco said that he wrote this play as a response to the widespread conversion of supposedly free-thinking individuals to fascist ideals before and during World War II. So, these people are supposedly free-thinking, like Jean. I will speak about Jean later also. Jean is a typical representative of the intellectual class. And he thinks that he is free-thinking. He thinks that he has free will. But he also changes. He also transforms into the fascist regime. That means he joins the collective consciousness. Ionesco said of collective consciousness himself, this is what he said. I'll just read out a few lines from Ionesco's own opinion about collective consciousness. He says, I wonder if I have hit upon a new plague. He calls it a plague. a plague of modern times, a strange disease that thrives in different forms, but is in principle the same. Automated, systematized thinking. So collective consciousness is also called automatic, systematized thinking by Ionesco. The idealization of the ideologies screens the mind from reality, perverts our understanding, and makes us blind. This is what he said about collective consciousness. It perverts our thinking, our understanding, and makes us blind. So he is for individual thinking. He is for individual understanding. And he does not belong to the blind fascist rule. So this is collective consciousness, people going in hordes, in crowds, and joining the rhinos. Remember that in this play, becoming a rhinoceros is something voluntary. Remember that when Jean became a rhinoceros, or when Bothard became a rhinoceros, or when Papillon became a rhinoceros, Berenger was astonished and he was shocked. Why are they doing this? He shouldn't have done this. That means it is something very voluntary to be a rhinoceros. You choose to become a rhinoceros, and you can choose not to become a rhinoceros. And when the people are joining in hordes to become rhinoceroses, it means that they are choosing to become a rhinoceros. It is a voluntary thing. And Berenger is shocked at it. He says, I will never do it. I will never become a rhinoceros. Another aspect of the rhinoceros, which I just mentioned actually, which Ionesco also called a disease. Ionesco said, if you remember, I just read out that it is a strange disease that thrives in human forms. So another aspect of this image is that it is often spoken of as a kind of epidemic, as a kind of disease. They call it rhinoceritis, a disease which Berenger is terrified of catching. And people like Dudad, they try to take in their stride. They think that even if it is a disease, you must go along with it. Like we are saying of Corona. People said, our leaders said that you should keep Corona by your side all the time now. So we have to live with Corona. That is what people have been saying now, because they can't do anything about it. So the same thing is about rhinoceritis. And Dudad says, why get upset over a few cases of rhinoceritis? Perhaps it's just another disease. So why are you getting upset about it? People are catching rhinoceritis like a disease. Berenger says, exactly. And I'm frightened of catching it. Like I know that we have to live with Corona, but I'm still frightened of catching it, isn't it? So Berenger says the same thing, that I'm frightened of catching it. Actually, what happens, Jean and Bothard, people like Jean and Bothard, I told you that they represent the intellectual class. যেটাকে আমরা বাংলায় বলি আতেল, তারা ঠিক intellectual নয়, তারা আতেল. And because of this, that means pseudo-intellectual. In English, we call it pseudo-intellectual. And Ionesco was tremendously against this class. And he's satirizing the intellectual class through Jean and Bothard. And he said about the intellectuals, that is, Ionesco said, he said, personally, I mistrust the intellectuals. I'm reading from him. Personally, I mistrust the intellectuals who for 30 odd years have done nothing but propagate different forms of rhinoceritis and who merely provide a philosophical justification for those waves of collective hysteria that periodically sweep over whole nations. He calls it collective hysteria. And he says that these people, these intellectuals, for 30 years, they have been propagating different forms of rhinoceritis. So Jean and Botard, on the surface, they say that we should be free-thinking individuals and so on and so forth. But actually, they are the ones who first join the guard, the Iron Guard. They become the ones who become rhinoceroses. So later, what happens when everybody's transforming? All his friends are transforming, like Ionesco had said. Berenger even tries to devise ways of curing this disease at the end. When in that beautiful love scene between Daisy and Berenger, he talks of regenerating them. He talks of regenerating the rhinoceroses and of changing the world. Daisy cannot agree with him. Daisy wants an insulated world. An insulated world where only they will live, free from rhinoceritis. And Berenger cannot accept that. He wants to change the world. That is why very soon Daisy begins to think differently. She says that rhinoceritis is normal and being human is abnormal. And Berenger thinks that the rhinos are disgusting. And she thinks that they are beautiful. He thinks that they are roaring and grunting. She thinks they are singing. So naturally, very soon, she leaves Berenger and goes off to become a rhino. Ultimately, Berenger becomes alone. He remains totally alone. In the last scene, when silhouettes of rhino bands are seen marching together, all of them are seen marching together, rhinos all together. Berenger points at them. That is, if you think about the stage in your mind, you will see that he's pointing at the audience. He points at the audience, that is, he's pointing at the silhouettes of the rhinos, and he says, there's only them left now. Nobody but them. That means everybody has become a rhinoceros. Even the members of the audience, you, me, everybody we all have become rhinoceroses. And Berenger is pointing at us, pointing at the audience, pointing at all the rhinos, and he's saying that the rhinos, they are everywhere. There's only them left now, and I am totally alone. It is as if to say that the people in the audience have become, because they have caught rhinoceritis, because rhinoceritis is a contagious disease. At the end of the play, Berenger remembers something. Berenger also changes, but not into a rhino. His whole character changes, his whole attitude changes. In the beginning, he was apathetic. He was a drunkard. He didn't think of anybody. He was only interested in Daisy and nothing else. Now, at the end, he changes into a Superman of the kind that Nietzsche had spoken about. A change that is both moral and spiritual. This is completely opposite to the transformation of men into beasts. Berenger, he shakes off his weak will, his lack of responsibility, and he becomes a free-thinking individual. He tries to save the world from rhinoceritis, from the tyranny of the rhinos. His final stand is, I'm not capitulating. Have you read the play Mother Courage and Her Children? In that play, Mother Courage had said that she had sung the song of the grand capitulation, that we have to capitulate, she says. That means we have to surrender. But Berenger in the play, he takes an opposite stand. He says, I'm not capitulating. I'm not surrendering. He will not submit to his low, beastly nature. He will become a complete human being. That means he is the one hero who Ionesco had spoken about. Ionesco had said that these are the real heroes who stand up alone against this kind of rhinoceritis, who stand up alone and say, I will not become a rhinoceros. Everybody is turning into rhinoceroses. I am not going to become a rhinoceros. I'm going to remain a human being. This is the real Superman, not the Superman that Quadriano speaks about. This is the real Superman. And this is the real meaning of the play Rhinoceros, the image of the rhinoceros. As not only the image alone, but as it is shown as a contrast to human nature. And human nature is shown only by Berenger. And a pathetic human being, but now he has become a total hero, a real hero, a Superman at the end. Thank you very much. If you have any questions to ask me, you can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Indrani Dev ma'am, for that illuminating lecture on rhinoceros. Now I request Professor Arun Mandal sir, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of English, to conduct the interactive session. Sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Dev, for that very lucid and insightful lecture. Thank you on behalf of the department. It's time for the interactive session now, and I welcome questions, observations. You can directly post your questions on the chat box, or you can unmute yourselves and put questions. Any question, please?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, good morning.
Please confirm that my voice is clear to you.
You're audible. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I can't really utter how much I am kindled up with your enlightening lecture.
Thank you so much.
Whatever. Thank you. Unlike, ma'am, in the Metamorphosis by Kafka, or to be more particular, unlike Gather Shamsa, in Rhinoceros, we see the metamorphosis of a greater community of people, except Berenger. He had some avant-garde principles.
Yes.
Therefore, some thinkers like Mitchell Bennett argue that Berenger is a Sisyphean hero. When I found that Berenger is qualifying the definition of modern tragic hero given by Arthur Miller.
Yes.
Now I am in a little dilemma. If Berenger is a hero, what kind of hero he is? Please kindle me up with your observation. What do you mean?
You are talking about the classical kind of tragic hero.
Classical.
Yes.
The definition of classical tragic hero given by Aristotle is not applicable for Berenger, but the modern tragic hero's definition given by Arthur Miller is applicable for Berenger. So I want to know from you that what kind of hero is Berenger? What is your observation on that?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. There are, apart from the classical idea, there are many types of ideas of tragic heroes. Though we normally do not totally forget Aristotle's idea or anybody else's idea, there are many levels to various opinions about the tragic hero. But in Ionesco's Rhinoceros and in Ionesco's other plays also, what we find is that the tragic hero concept is related to Nietzsche's concept of the Superman. Nietzsche had said that the Superman is the real leader of human beings. And being a real leader, he is different. He is greater, like Aristotle's hero. He is greater than the others. Why? Not because he is a king or a general, But because he can stand up, he has the courage to stand up against the masses, to stand up against morality even, and to say that I am alone, I can stand alone and I can lead the world. Remember that Berenger says that he is going to regenerate the world. Even when Daisy says that we will live together in a beautiful, peaceful utopia of our own, he rejects it. He says that no, my aim is to regenerate the world. Even those who have become rhinoceroses, I have to bring them back. So actually, his type of tragic hero is more related to the Nietzschean type of tragic hero, the Nietzschean idea of the Superman, which I have told you about. Is that clear? So more or less?
Yes, ma'am. It's clear.
Thank you, madam. There is a question by Sheshadri Shorkar.
Yes.
Berenger never metamorphosed into rhinoceros. Do you think, madam, it is actually an emblem? It is actually emblematic of his willingness of withholding himself from fascist ideology?
Yes, it is. It is. That is exactly what the idea of INESCO is. That fascism is taking up everybody, is engulfing the whole nation, and it is anti-humanistic. That is what I told you in the beginning, that it is anti-humanistic. And the only human being, therefore, who remains at the end is Berenger, and he is alone standing up against the fascist onslaught. So therefore, Berenger is a human being. He wants to remain a human. I'm not capitulating. That means I'm not going to surrender to the fascist onslaught. Is that clear?
Thank you, madam. There is a question from a faculty member of a college, Mitra Shanikrai.
Yes.
Madam, do you feel INESCO's celebration of individualism through Berenger is absolute and unqualified? He remains human till the end, and that is a victory, but he's alone. That's the question, madam.
That is why he's a hero. He is alone. That is why he's a hero. Nobody wants to be alone. In another place, I don't have time to explain all this to you. In another place, UNESCO had given us types of rhinos, types of people who are becoming rhinos. Some rhinos want to be fascists. Some rhinos, they are, in a kind of quandary, a kind of conflict, whether they will become rhinos or not. And some people, they become rhinos because other people are becoming rhinos. They are following others. So UNESCO had spoken about these differences also, that all the rhinos who have, all the people who have rhinoceritis, they are not of the same mode. So actually, Berenger could have said this, that Daisy is becoming a rhino, so I will become a rhino. Jean is becoming a rhino, so I will become a rhino. All his friends, or even Botard, who had spoken staunchly against rhinos, he also became a rhino. So he could have said that I will also join you all. But he did not. And that is why he is a hero. That is why he's not like you or me. That is why he is different. Everybody chooses to go with the tide. They choose to go with the stream. But he says that, no, I will stop myself. I will remain a human being till the end. And becoming a human being is that is actually very rare now. By the time we come to the end of the play, humans are rare. Rhinos are in the majority.
Thank you, madam. There is a question by Alekha Mondol. My question will be twofold to Professor Dev. As you already mentioned, can we consider Rhinoceros as a dramatic Bildungsroman of Berenger, as he is somebody who is apathetic and an alcoholic at the beginning, and at the end is all the one to preserve the rational values of the society? Second, considering the element of social protest, how far is INESCO similar and contrasting with Arthur Miller?
Now, the first part of your answer, a Bildungsroman is a type of story this is absolutely clear cut. There is no difference in the definition of Bildungsroman. A Bildungsroman is specifically a story that shows the development of a child into an adult. A person who is a child at the beginning of the story, he develops into maturity by the end of the story. That is a Bildungsroman. So, in this respect, according to the definition of a Bildungsroman, Berenger is not developing from a child into an adult. He is developing from an apathetic, uninvolved individual into a hero. He is not a hero in the beginning. He becomes a hero. In a way, you are right that there is a change in him. There is a development in him into maturity. That is clear. But I would suggest that you do not call it a Bildungsroman. Second part of your question, that the difference from Arthur Miller is this, that Arthur Miller's social criticism is direct social criticism. In Arthur Miller's plays, like for instance in Crucible or Death of a Salesman, what we have is a realistic presentation of the society. Social criticism is social criticism anyway, whether it is in Shaw or in Arthur Miller or in Ionesco or in any other dramatist. But the manner in which social criticism is presented, that is how the plays are different. That is why George Bernard Shaw's social criticism is different from Arthur Miller's social criticism, which is different from Ionesco's social criticism. Ionesco's social criticism is shown through a mode which is called the absurdist mode. The method of showing it is very different. And in the case of Arthur Miller, it is a realistic presentation, though you have a lot of symbolism, though you have a lot of imagery used in Arthur Miller, even then that is more or less a realistic presentation, which you don't have in Ionesco. There lies the difference. Is that clear?
Thank you, madam. Next speaker is actually waiting. We will take 2-3 more questions. There's a question by one of our students, Sriradha Gu. What does the green color of rhinoceros symbolize?
The green color actually symbolizes the most, this is very peculiar. I should have mentioned it before. That is, in most of the countries that I have mentioned, in almost the whole of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, fascism was rampant. And in most cases, the fascist uniform was in various shades of green. Various shades. Some were olive green, some were deep green, some were light green, but in various shades of green. And what happened was that Ionesco chose an animal who has a shade of green in its coat, in its skin. Rhinoceroses are not green. Actually, rhinoceroses have a shade of brown, but the rhinos in Ionesco's play, they are always shown with a shade of green. Because of this particular point, that almost, this is peculiar, I don't know why, but most of the uniforms of all the fascist guards throughout Europe, they had some kind of green in their uniforms. So this shows you that fascism is actually the main direct form of attack here.
Thank you, madam. There's a question.
Thank you very much, madam. Hello?
By
May I speak?
Yeah, please.
Hello, sir. One more?
Please.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your informative and quite interesting lecture. My question is, Madam, how can you relate the theme of this play with Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of existentialism?
Actually, all absurdist drama, all absurdism is connected with existentialism. We can even say that absurdism is an offshoot of existentialism. The existentialist angst, we call it the existentialist angst. It is a term that refers to a sense of confusion or disorientation that arises from the realization of an absurd world. And Sartre, in his writings and his novels also, his aim was to show such an absurd world through the existentialist mode. The existentialist idea was existence precedes essence. And in this play also you have this idea, existence precedes essence. This is often brought into the sphere of analysis by Ionesco. Jean-Paul Sartre said that humans have no essence before their existence because there is no creator. He denies the existence of a creator at all. And what we find in this play is the same thing. You will find there is a peculiar thing that in the whole play there is not a single mention of religion or of God. Just one place where Marxism is referred to as a religion. If you remember, if you think of the play, that is very important. So existentialism and absurdism are integrally related. Sartre's mode of expression is different and Ionesco's mode of expression is different. He chooses the drama, he chooses essays and novels. That is the only difference. Have I answered your question?
There's a question by Nuton Shorkar. All the characters who are transformed into rhinoceroses are symbolic representation of diseased humanity, and in that respect, can we consider Berenger as an ideal one to be followed?
Now, the point is that Berenger was not an ideal man. He becomes an ideal man because he stands up for humanity. In this respect, he is an ideal. That when you stand up for humanism and humanity, and fascism is totally dehumanized. Fascism is something that dehumanizes a person. In this respect, Berenger is a hero to be followed.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And this is the last question
Yes.
by Obrita Bottombell. Ma'am, you are a fascinating orator. I just want to ask that while listening to you, I was suddenly reminded of Kafka's The Trial. But unlike the hero of the rhinoceros, Joseph K. succumbs to the onslaughts hurled upon him. Can you enlighten us in this regard?
Actually, as I said, both are absurdist. Kafka's existentialism is very much close to Ionesco. I sometimes, like somebody spoke of metamorphosis, Kafka's metamorphosis. In Kafka, the only difference that we find in Kafka from Kafka and between Kafka and Ionesco is this, that Kafka is very individualistic. Kafka's, normally all the conflicts that he shows are individual conflicts in the individual mind, in all his stories. But in Ionesco, there is a definite social basis. You will find that when in Metamorphosis, when he becomes a bug, a cockroach, then what happens is this: he alone becomes a cockroach. It is the predicament of an individual in modern society. But in Ionesco's place, that is not the case. The condition is the same. The predicament is the same, but it is a social predicament in Ionesco's place. He talks about society as a whole, and one individual stays human. Whereas in Kafka, one individual becomes non-human, or faces a problem, or faces a dilemma like in the trial. Is that clear?
Thanks a lot, madam, for attending each and every question. Now over to my colleague, Professor Shibojyoti Kormokar, Assistant Professor, Department of English. Professor Kormokar, are you there?
Yes.
Can I leave the...
Madam, just a minute. Just a minute.
Thank you, Ayun. Thank you, Dr. Indrani Dev, for such an insightful, thought-provoking and engaging lecture.
Thank you so much.
Rhinoceros is a text in the UG curriculum of the Bankura University. And I am sure that your lucid yet scholarly presentation has immensely benefited the students. Apart from that, I think that the illuminating insights you have provided in your lecture have directly catered to the academic appetite of the faculty members and research scholars of different institutions alike. This lecture, I'm sure, has spurred in the minds of all the impetus to know more about the theatre of the absurd, existentialism in general, and Ionesco in particular. Wholehearted thanks from our end, madam, that despite of your busy administrative duties that bother any principal even during the lockdown days, you devoted this much of time for the academic benefit of all the participants in this international web lecture series. Thank you, madam. Thanks a lot. May I now request Devopriya to formally commence the second session.
Sir, am I audible?
You are audible, Devopriya. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. I once again welcome to our second speaker in today's session, Dr. Jibo Matthew George, sir, Assistant Professor of English and Foreign Languages, University, Hyderabad. May I request Professor Ayun Mandal, sir, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of English, to formally introduce him. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Devopriya, for giving me the chance of introducing an internationally reputed scholar and academician. G.B. Matthew George is Assistant Professor in the School of Literary Studies, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, India. He holds MA degrees in English Literature, Philosophy and Religion, and Political Science, and MSc degree in Applied Psychology, a PhD on James Joyce, an advanced diploma in German, and a junior diploma in French. His areas of research include meta questions in the humanities, philosophy and history of religion, continental philosophy, philosophy of history, hermeneutics, philosophy of literature, European intellectual history, literary modernism, 20th century European fiction in translation, 20th century literary theory, narratology, mythology and folklore, lifespan psychology, and Holocaust studies. He is the author of The Ontology of Gods, an account of enchantment, disenchantment, and re-enchantment, published by Palgrave Macmillan, Ulysses Quotidianus, James Joyce's Inverse Histories of the Everyday, and philosophical meta-reflections on literary studies, why do things with texts and what to do with them. He is currently editing a multi-volume international anthology of essays entitled De Natura Fidei, Rethinking Religion Across Disciplinary Boundaries, to be published in the Palgrave Interdisciplinary Handbook series. He featured in the Oxford Academic Index of Critics in 2018. He was a research fellow at the Zurich James Joyce Foundation in 2008. In the same year, he also received a Dard Scholarship for study at Technische Universität Dresden and a scholarship offered by University College Dublin. Awarded an overseas travel grant by the Indian Council of Social Science Research in 2014. He is editor of the Literary Studies Humanities issues of the English and Foreign Languages Journal, member of the Board of Reviewers of Local Colloquies and International Journal of World Literatures and Cultures, reviewer of Maulana Azad Journal of English Language and Literature, member of the editorial advisory group Cambridge Scholars, and pre-publication reviewer for Springer Dordrecht and Orient Black Swan, Hyderabad. Over to Dr. Jibu Matthew George. Sir, please.
So, am I audible?
You are audible, sir. You are perfectly audible.
So, it's a pleasure to be with you. And thank you very much for having me on the program. And thank you for the generous introduction. Because of the situation we are in right now, it is common these days for speakers to begin with an invocation of the COVID-19 pandemic and the virus that has caused it. More or less the same way as ancient storytellers used to begin with an invocation of gods. So I don't want to depart from this new convention either. During the early days of the pandemic, while addressing a press conference in New York, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of the state of New York, said, these are unnatural times. So my daughter walks into the room, I can't hug her. My colleague walks in, I can't shake hands with him. All this is unnatural. So we are in extraordinary times, unusual times. And as far as I can remember, this is the diciest occurrence of our lifetime. Dicey or unpredictable because the pandemic is still unfolding. We don't know how it will affect us, how it will affect others, and so on. And the nearest temporal precedent we've got is the Spanish flu of 1918. A great challenge these days is to make sense of what is happening to us, what's happening around us, or to make meaning of what's happening now. So in today's lecture, we will be talking a lot about meaning in the context of Derrida and deconstruction. So one way of making sense of the things happening now is to look at literary texts. So almost suddenly, Albert Camus' The Plague has become a hot favorite, written in 1947, La Peste in French. Then there's a less talked about work written by Mary Shelley, The Last Man, which came out in 1826. It is about a pandemic that started in Asia and sweeps across Europe. We also have turned to movies dealing with pandemics and epidemics. Outbreak 1995, Contagion 2011. A student of mine who was planning to work on therapeutic reading decided to work on quarantine fiction. So on the lighter note, let me also share with you a WhatsApp message that I received from a colleague of mine. It's in a light-hearted reference to Yeats's 1916, Easter 1916. He said, Easter 2020, all changed utterly. So let's get going. Deconstruction and Derrida's thought are widely considered to be the most complex topic in literary theory. So why do people think it is so difficult? So again, on a lighter note, let me say, we in academia are plagued by a certain syndrome. And what is that syndrome? It is what I call this goes over my head syndrome. So social psychology has a concept called cognitive miser theory. The human mind is a cognitive miser. It is proposed by two social psychologists, Susan Fiske and Shelley Taylor. So the idea is that we try to negotiate the world, understand the world with the least cognitive effort or the least investment of cognitive energies. But it's not only our fault. The reader himself writes in an unconventional idiom. It could also be the problem with translation. It's the rendering of the thought in English, because I know quite a few ordinary French men and women who relate to the reader's thought and deconstruction. So what did the reader himself think of this kind of writing? You know, the reader's writing itself is quite complex, intricate. Ellen Sisu, probably a name which you've heard. Ellen Sisu, who contributed the concept of écriture féminine, or roughly translated into English as feminine writing. Ellen Sisu called the generation of thinkers that emerged from École Normale Supérieure in Paris, including Derrida, including Michel Foucault, Gilles Deleuze, Roland Barthes, the theorist of reader response theory, and also Jean-François Lyotard, who tried to define postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives. So Ellen Sisu used an interesting term, that is the incorruptibles. And Derrida himself responded to the use of this term in an interview that he gave to the newspaper, the French daily Le Monde, meaning the world. And he said it is a new ethos of writing and thinking. And he continued, he tried to interpret this usage. He said, neither public opinion, nor the media, nor the phantasm of an intimidating readership shall frighten or force us into simplifying or repressing. Perhaps that is a part of the ethos that Indian higher education can also emulate. So if higher education has to be really higher, we have to overcome the syndrome that I mentioned, this goes over my head syndrome. So I'm saying that in a lighter vein, if you want to understand anything, we have to invest our full attention, our total energy, and time, of course. So if you can give me your full attention for the next 50 minutes or so, we will be able to cover a lot of ground. Right. So is deconstruction really incomprehensible? That is the million-dollar question. This is what I'm going to say is something which you find in introductory books on Derrida and deconstruction, and I tried to do this with my daughter. I tried to discuss this complex concept with my daughter. She was in grade 6 or 7 when I discussed this with her. So I'm not saying that deconstruction is child's play, but I asked her, if you want to look up the dictionary for the meaning of a word, and if you turn the pages, what do you see? So she told me, as the meaning of a word, I find another word or a phrase or a description. Then what do you do with that? Then she told me, I look up the meaning of that second word. Then what if that word is difficult to understand? If you don't know the meaning of that word, what happens? Then she said, I look up the meaning of the third phrase or the word, and it goes on, right? So she asked me, but it should stop somewhere, right? And I told her, it doesn't stop. That is the point. And that is deconstruction in a simplified form. So is deconstruction a philosophical position? Is it an anti-philosophy? Is it a concept? Is it a school of thought like psychoanalysis? Is it a literary theory? Is it a critical practice? Or is it a method of reading? There are 3 responses to the question. You can quite simply say that deconstruction is all these things. There's nothing wrong about the response. It's all these things. But we have to look at deconstruction in a nuanced manner. So the second response is defining deconstruction or trying to define deconstruction itself goes against the spirit of deconstruction. We will see why. It goes against the spirit of deconstruction. But I have found a certain quotation in a work of Derrida's called The Time of a Thesis. Derrida had some difficulty in completing his PhD or the equivalent of the PhD, and he wrote about these experiences in a piece called The Time of a Thesis, Punctuations. So I'll repeat some of these references so that you can look up after the talk is over. The Time of a Thesis, Punctuations. And this is what he said. Every conceptual breakthrough amounts to transforming, that is deforming, the accredited, authorized relationship between a word and a concept. That, in essence, captures what deconstruction is. I hope you got it. So I'll stick my neck out and try to define deconstruction against the spirit of deconstruction. Derrida himself has tried to do that in an elusive manner. The third response is that often in Indian academia, we try to understand Derrida's thought in a piecemeal manner. Derrida himself is quite elusive, sometimes evasive, and he himself would have enjoyed this kind of piecemeal appropriation of his thought. But my sense is that we will be able to understand deconstruction in Derrida better if we try to understand these against the history of Western thought, European intellectual history. Right. I'll give you one example where Derrida illustrates the strained relationship between the word and the concept. Remember, one problem is that we try to read these thinkers such as Derrida and Foucault, in a piecemeal manner, often as an entity in itself. But these thinkers are writing against a very long tradition of thought. So often the lacuna is that we have not read all those things which they read. Okay, so I'll give you this example which Derrida has dug out from Greek philosophy, Greek thought. This is a Greek word, pharmakon. So the modern English word pharmacy is derived from pharmakon. So pharmakon, one meaning of pharmakon is medicine or remedy. So as I said, the modern word pharmacy, modern English word pharmacy is derived from that. So pharmakon means remedy or medicine, but it also means something very opposite to medicine, that is poison, right? So one is life enhancing, life saving, the other is life destroying. And it doesn't stop there. Pharmakon also means scapegoat. Pharmakon also means scapegoat. So look at the strained or fractured relationship between a word and a concept. Now, as I promised, I will, if not define, try to articulate the core of deconstruction. I would say the thrust of deconstruction is a conceptual negotiability innate to any discourse. Excuse me. I repeat, deconstruction is a conceptual negotiability innate to any discourse, or alternatively, a tension intrinsic to the concept itself. So if this is the case, so if every word, every concept is negotiable, as deconstruction has it, then we won't be able to speak. We won't be able to write. You won't be able to understand me. So Derrida postulated something called philosophemes. Philosophemes, philosophemes. So what are philosophemes? Philosophemes are conceptual constants. Now, a smart question which I have faced while talking about Derrida is a question from one of my PhD scholars at my university. So she asked me, Are these philosophies also subject to a play of meaning? The whole thrust of deconstruction is undecidability of meaning. All meaning is subject to a play of signifiers. We'll go to that. So are philosophies also subject to that kind of play of signifiers, undecidability of meaning? What is the answer? The answer is yes. So one way of understanding deconstruction is by linking it to something which preceded deconstruction and post-structuralism, that is structuralism. Remember that post-structuralism is an umbrella term. Deconstruction can be considered part of it. So 20th century, late 20th century ideological critiques, Foucault and his ideas of discourse can all be considered part of post-structuralism. Deconstruction is something that falls under the umbrella term post-structuralism. So the key person in the background is a linguist, Ferdinand de Saussure. So you might have come across his name and some of his ideas in your literary theory classes. So the key person is Ferdinand de Saussure. So what is the contribution that Saussure has made to linguistics, to literary theory, and many other disciplines, including anthropology? So Saussure said, meaning is not referential, it is differential. Now, what does it mean? So this is an example that I use usually in my classes. So why do we call a dog a dog? Right. The Saussure said, any word is a sign, and a sign has two components. The first part is the signifier. The second part is the signified. What is the signifier? I utter the word dog. That is a signifier. Or I also use the written form of it. So I spell it as D-O-G. So a signifier could be spoken or written. Now, what is the signified? The signified is not the animal. The signified is our understanding of that animal, our concept of that animal, the idea that is evoked in our mind about the animal. So a dog is a dog because it's not fog or log, to put it bluntly. So meaning is differential. It is based on differences within the system of language. So the Saussure made two contributions. First, he split a sign into a signifier and a signified. He also said that meaning is not differential, it is not referential, it is differential. Now, why do we call a dog a dog? It is arbitrary. We call it because our ancestors called it dog. And as we know, we've got different names for that animal in various languages, right? So meaning is arbitrary. It is also a matter of social convention. Now, that much comes to us from Ferdinand de Saussure. Now, how does Derrida add to it? For Derrida and for deconstruction, the signifier and the signified have only a gliding relationship. It is only a matter of chance that the signifier and the signified coincide. And Derrida added to this whole concept of difference. He coined a portmanteau term, combination of two words. So Derrida said, meaning is not only a matter of difference, it is a matter of difference. So in French, there are two words which are pronounced similarly. One is differ, the other is defer. So out of these two terms, Derrida coined the term, portmanteau term, a playful term, difference. So meaning is not only a matter of difference, but it is also a matter of deferment or postponement of meaning. So in the linguistic system, what we find is not only difference, but also an endless postponement of meaning. You will not come to an ultimate meaning. You will not arrive at a final determinate meaning. So keep this idea in mind, difference, which combines difference and deferment, endless postponement or deferment of meaning. Not only that, Ferdinand de Saussure was basically making a neutral statement about the nature of language. Deconstruction celebrates this instability of language. It celebrates the undecidability of meaning. It is not a limitation. It has tremendous potential. We'll see how and why this undecidability of meaning has tremendous potential. Now, Derrida begins his thought by making a certain point, and that point concerns the erasure of distinction between philosophical and literary texts. Remember, Derrida is not only the property of literature and literary theory. In fact, a scholar of Derrida called Rodolphe Gachet said even his literary criticism, he was talking about a certain piece of Derrida's called Ulysses Gramophone. So he said Ulysses Gramophone, that is Derrida's literary criticism, itself is the property of philosophy. So that is why today's talk is entitled Derrida Deconstruction and the History of Western Thought. We are talking not only about literature and literary theory, but also about philosophy and the Western and the Western intellectual history. Derrida began his enterprise of deconstruction by erasing the distinction, a traditional distinction between philosophical texts and literary texts. What do you think is the difference? Philosophical statements or philosophical texts were concerned, according to a traditional distinction, with truth. Remember, today, if you say that philosophy is about the pursuit of truth, that's an inaccurate description. There's a teacher of mine who believes that the task of philosophy is a creation and critique of concepts. But if you ask me, I would say the task of philosophy is to take a thought to its logical conclusion with an eye for implications. Taking a thought to its logical conclusion with an eye for implications. If you ask me, this is also the task of research. Research is not a moment, it is a process. So there was this traditional distinction made between philosophical texts and literary texts. And literary texts were considered products of imagination. There was wordplay. There was figurative use of language. Now Derrida comes and says, even philosophical texts are products of language. Figurative language is used in philosophical texts, and the so-called truth statements made in philosophical texts are also subject to figurative language and the play of signifiers. Okay, so even philosophical texts are subject to a free play of signifiers. And I want to give you a French statement. In French, it reads, Il n'y a pas hors du texte. Il n'y a pas hors du texte. This is mistranslated into English that there is nothing outside the text. That is not very accurate. A better translation would be, there is no outside of the text. There is no outside of the text. Now, what does Derrida mean by this? He means that all that we have is a textual field, a field of signifiers. There is nothing outside this field of signifiers which can guarantee a decidable, stable meaning. So what could these possible things be outside the text that can guarantee us a stable, fixed meaning? So it could be reason, it could be common sense, it could be what in literary studies we call context, it could be truth, it could be God or divine sanction. So I mentioned God or divine sanction for a purpose, because Derrida's thought and his whole philosophical, critical, theoretical enterprise is bent on undoing something which he calls logocentrism. I repeat, logocentrism, or what he called metaphysics of presence. Now, what is that? So in a simple way, I can say it is the Western philosophical belief in a stable or fixed concept behind a word or discourse. Now, logocentrism is an interesting concept. And the core of that word is logos. Logos is a very complex word. I would say it is the most complex word in the Indo-European family of languages, in the Indo-European vocabulary. So what does logos mean? So it means word. You remember in school, while we were introduced to any discipline, biology, for example, we were told that the term biology is derived from two words. What are they? So bios meaning life and logos meaning knowledge. So any discipline is a systematic knowledge of a certain field. So logos means a lot of things. Logos means word, it means meaning, it means wisdom, it means knowledge. Logos also means governing reason or reason itself. It also means organizing principle. Logos was that one concept with the help of which the ancient philosophers tried to make sense of the world. So the whole world could be understood in terms of what they called logos and many other concepts. Okay, so when we read Christianity, the first century of the Common Era, the Gospel according to Saint John, chapter 1, verse 1 reads, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God." And the word used by John is logos. So Saint John used the word logos to prove to Greeks who are his audience that the Son of God had existence prior to the arrival of Jesus Christ on earth. So it is logos that is at the core of Derrida's critique of what he calls logocentrism. Now, this word is quite potent. In the theological context, logos means an utterance and the meaning of that utterance. Remember, are you all with me? Yeah, it is complex, but if you give me your attention, if you invest some time, attention, and energy, you will certainly be able to comprehend this. So in the theological context, logos means both an utterance and the meaning of an utterance. In the theological context, these two are identical. They cannot be separated. God had said something. You cannot say that I want to interpret it in another way, right? So in the theological context, these are identical. Now, what Derrida has done is to drive a wedge between the two senses of logos, between the utterance and the meaning of that utterance. Another related concept for Derrida is phonocentrism. Now, what does it mean? If you look at the word telephone, it's sound over a distance, literally sound over a distance. So phone means sound. So phonocentrism means that in Western history, the Western intellectual history, speech has been privileged over writing. That is Derrida's contention. We might contest that idea. In fact, people have contested that idea. If you're interested in a critique of deconstruction, you can read an accessible book called Against Deconstruction, written by Professor John M. Ellis. John M. Ellis says that it's not very true to say that speech has been privileged in Western thought, in Western tradition, over writing. The Western tradition has a long history of manuscripts, scribes, and intricate processes of manuscript conservation. So can you say that Western tradition privileged speech over phenomena? They underrated writing. Can you really say that? So this is one criticism. Ellis has other criticisms against Derrida as well. He says that Derrida's thought is based on a wholesale garbling of Saussurian terminology. For example, in many places, Derrida says that a signified also has a signifier. It might not be true in ordinary language, but another thinker who carry on this tradition of deconstruction. Roland Barthes has in fact said that a discourse has a second order signification. And Roland Barthes, in the collection of writings called Mythologies, contends that when you say something, or even when you show a photograph, in fact, he gives the example of a photograph in which a black soldier salutes the French imperial flag. So it is an ideological, it also makes an ideological statement, right? So on the surface, there's only this image. And beneath that, there is an ideological meaning. So there's a second order signification. And at that second level or order, what we have is ideological meanings, right? Roland Barthes gives another example of detergent ads. So you see Surf Excel and the Ariel ads in which the microbes are shown, and you can kill germs. So in some of the French ads which Roland Barthes saw, he sees this is just some kind of class war. There are certain elements of society you need to eliminate, like the microbes. Okay, so there is a second order signification happening, but in ordinary language, it's not very correct, and that's a point of Ellis's critique of Derrida. If you may go back in European history of thought, we will see some early precedents of deconstruction. What I have in mind is what philosophers call Euthyphro dilemma. Now, Socrates, the Athenian philosopher, that is a Socrates we know through Plato's dialogues, stops a young man. Okay, so Euthyphro, you find a version of it in another dialogue called Ion also. So Socrates stops a young man, asks him, "Where are you going?" And the young man says, "I am going to sue my father." So why? Socrates asks, and the young man replies, "He has killed his slave." So Socrates prompts him into questioning his own assumptions and asks, "So what?" The young man says, "It's morally wrong." Then Socrates responds, "Is it morally wrong because gods disapprove of it? Or do gods disapprove of it because it is morally wrong?" Because the young man had said, it is morally wrong because gods disapprove of it. See, you see that fix. Is an act immoral because gods disapprove of it? Or do gods really disapprove of it because it is intrinsically wrong? Now, philosophers use this as an example to show the relationship or non-relationship between religion and morality. Right? But to me, this is the beginning of deconstruction. Deconstruction in a seminal or foundational form. Why do I say that? A certain concept, the morality or the ethical correctness of an action, does that depend on divine approval? Or does divine approval depend upon the intrinsic morality of the action? So one concept is dependent upon another concept. And as I said, this is the beginning of a deconstruction in an elementary form. So next thinker, in fact, we are skipping a lot, and this is actually a long story. I would have liked to discuss Heidegger in some detail, but I'm skipping him because we have got many other things. And I want to do it in such a way that it will be helpful to students of literary theory, students of literary studies. So I've got some practical criticism as well, practical deconstruction or deconstruction at work as well. So the thinker that I want to really pick up is Friedrich Nietzsche. 19th century philosopher. He died in 1900. It's usually said that modernism begins with the death of Nietzsche in 1900. Another chronology is that modernism is a term used to denote the literary works produced between the two world wars. So anyway, Nietzsche is quite important for Derrida. Heidegger is important, but we don't have time for him. There are two strands of thought that begin from Nietzsche. The first is what I call the power and ideology line. the power and ideology line. In the book called Genealogy of Morals, Friedrich Nietzsche had undertaken what he called a transvaluation of values. He looked at the values of Judeo-Christianity, pity, humility, love, and he questioned the origin of these values. So why does Judeo-Christianity, perhaps all religions, value these values? Okay, love, humility, pity, and so on. Why not brutality? Why not pride? Now, Nietzsche's answer was that the Jews were always under the rule of some empire or the other. So they were under the rule of the Egyptians, they were under Roman reign, they were under Babylonian or Chaldean control. So they were always the underdogs. And they developed a slave morality. They valorized their own morals or values, and they demonized their masters' values such as pride and cruelty. Now, Nietzsche's larger point is that apparently neutral concepts such as truth, morality, and reason are in fact matters of political expediency. There's nothing innocent under the sun. So in 20th century, you will find the proliferating popularity of ideological criticism, right? So Foucault's ideas of discourse. So Foucault and ideological critics are the greatest descendants of this strand of Nietzsche's thought, which I have called power and ideology line. But there is a second line of thought, which I call the language line. And Derrida is a descendant of, inheritor of that strand of thought. Friedrich Nietzsche, in another of his works, translated into English as On Truth and Falsehood in a Non-Moral Sense. This work is also known under another title, On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense. So he makes an interesting statement. Nietzsche says, what is truth? Truth is a mobile army of metaphors, metonymies, and anthropomorphisms. So you know each of these terms, right? Metaphor, one of the figurative devices of language, metonymy and anthropomorphism, literally envisaging everything in human form, in the form of anthropos. So what is the idea here? The idea is that truth statements, as we saw earlier, are also metaphorical. But in course of time, we have forgotten the metaphoricity of these truth statements, right? So even truth statements have a metaphorical subtext, and we have forgotten that. And Derrida is a descendant or inheritor of that strand of thought, which I've called language line of Nietzsche's philosophy. Now we come to what is of importance to literature students, right? An important concept here is iterability. 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 Iterability is a portmanteau term, another combination of two words. It comes from Latin iterare, meaning to repeat. Iterare means to repeat. So reiterate comes from Latin infinitive iterare, and Sanskrit idara, meaning the other. So iterability is repeatability with a difference. So in the context of literary theory and criticism, it means the capacity of text to produce new meanings in new situations. So I hope you're with me. It is the capacity of text to produce new meanings in new situations. Right. Iterability. So I'll give you a practical example. This is actually a passage from the Bible, Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 25, chapter 29, verse 29. And you'll find versions of this across the Gospels. And it reads, "To the one who has, more shall be given, and he shall have in abundance. from the one who does not have, whatever he has also will be taken away. I repeat, to the one who has, more shall be given, and he shall have in abundance. And from the one who does not have, whatever he has also will be taken away from him. Now, I read this while I was in high school, okay? So 8th or 9th. So I was born in the Syrian Christian household in the communist bastion of Kerala. Now, I thought that it was a critique of an acquisitive society in which the rich became richer and the poor became poorer. See, I belong to a certain cultural context, a linguistic context with many socio-cultural forces. So I interpreted this text this way. But that's not the original meaning of the verse. The original meaning of the verse is you put to work the gifts from the Holy Spirit. God has given you certain gifts. You have to put it to work. And if you put your talents, your gifts to work, you will get more and you can use more. That is the original idea. And see how I have interpreted out of misunderstanding. But according to Derrida, all understanding is misunderstanding. In French, mispression. All understanding is misunderstanding. Now, return to this verse. My friends in educational psychology tell me that this verse also signifies the cumulative nature of learning for them. The cumulative nature of learning. When you study something, when you learn something, you don't learn and forget. You don't study and forget. You build upon what you have studied previously, right? So learning is cumulative. So this verse signifies the cumulative nature of learning for students and teachers and theorists in educational psychology. So look at the phenomenon. Even scriptural texts, sacred texts, can be interpreted this way. This is a typical case of iterability. In the Western tradition, there are two kinds of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, I repeat, I would like to suggest, is not about particular interpretations, but it's a meta-science of interpretation. It's about formulating the principles of interpretation, right? So there are two kinds of hermeneutics in the West. The first is called the hermeneutics of faith, which is mostly concerned with the interpretation of sacred texts. It is more traditional. It aims at the restoration of original pristine meanings to avoid misinterpretation, to avoid misunderstanding. But there is another kind of hermeneutics. It's called hermeneutics of suspicion. And this distinction was made by another French thinker called Paul Ricoeur, a philosopher, a psychoanalyst, so to say, a critic, theorist, called Paul Ricoeur. He made a distinction between hermeneutics of faith and hermeneutics of suspicion. What is hermeneutics of suspicion? Remember, this is what we practice in post-colonial criticism, feminist criticism, Marxist criticism, psychoanalytic criticism, and so on. So what we do is, we do not trust the surface. There is something beneath the surface. There could be the unconscious. There could be class relations which are otherwise hidden. There are patriarchal assumptions, as a feminist would put it. Right? So there are things beneath the surface, and our aim is to reveal these things which are beneath the surface, which are not obvious. So there are two kinds of hermeneutics of faith and hermeneutics of suspicion. And now let us look at deconstruction in practice. Now, Derrida saw the protean energies of the text or equivocal character of language revealed in certain authors. And one of these authors for Derrida was James Joyce. And he in fact wrote two pieces on James Joyce. The first is called Ulysses Gramophone. The other is entitled Two Words for Joyce. Listen very carefully, you will see deconstruction in practice. Ulysses Gramophone is written on Joyce's magnum opus, Ulysses, written in 1922, and Derrida wrote a piece on Ulysses Gramophone. So what he does in Ulysses Gramophone is a kind of non-linear reading of the difficult text called Ulysses. In Ulysses, in chapter 7 called Aeolus, Aeolus is a god of winds. So remember, I used the word Protean energies of the text. Proteus is an early Greek god of water bodies. Aeolus is a god of winds. So in Aeolus, this chapter 7, Leopold Bloom, the protagonist of the novel and an advertisement canvasser, makes a call to somebody called Alexander Keys, wine, spirit, and tea merchants in Dublin. And he is unable to communicate properly with Alexander Keys. He makes a phone call. He tries to speak over the phone. He does not receive a proper response. The many chapters later, to be precise, the last chapter or episode of Ulysses, in Ulysses, chapters are also called episodes. So the final episode is called Penelope. Molly Bloom, having entertained her concert manager in bed, goes to sleep and she has her periods. And she is thinking her thoughts in the form of an interior monologue. It's called Penelope. And it's quite interesting. 8 sentences running into 50 pages without any conventional punctuation. And she begins a monologue saying, yes, and she goes on to many things. Yes, I will cook breakfast for him tomorrow morning. Yes, he did that many years ago, and so on. Yes. Derrida argues that this yes is a response to Bloom's phone call. Can you read text that way? So many scholars of deconstruction would say deconstruction is basically subversive reading. Any subversive reading is deconstruction, right? Now, moving on to the next work on Joyce, 2 words for Joyce. It is based on Joyce's last work, Finnegan's Wake. Remember that in Finnegan's Wake, there is no apostrophe. Finnegan's, F-I-N-N-E-G-A-N-S, Finnegan's Wake. It is the archetypal story of a cosmic man. Okay, it uses 40 languages. It is the most esoteric text in literary history. So I'll give you some samples. So first Derrida's, the second mine. Okay, so Derrida uses these 2 words, he, war. I'm not mispronouncing war. It's W-A-R. So it could either mean he makes war, but in German, W-A-R, war, also means was. So this is an equivocal plurisignificatory kind of reading. Plurisignification is a word that Derrida uses for the nature of language. Now, my sample from Finnegan's Wake, listen very carefully. Joyce wrote this book while he had 11 surgeries in his eye. It is meant to be read aloud and listened to, not merely read with the help of eyes. Listen very carefully. The sounds are very important. The novel itself is a kind of puzzle solving. Listen carefully. The grisly old psychos who have done our unsmiling bit on young Alices who are young and easily frightened. You can Google for this passage. The grisly old psychos who have done our unsmiling bit on young Alices who are young and easily frightened. We grisly old psychos, we psychoanalysts. He was talking about psychoanalysts. In fact, Joyce's daughter had psychological issues and she was under the treatment of Carl Gustav Jung, Freud's disciple. So grisly old psychos who have done our unsmiling bit on young Alices, young girls, but it's also a reference to Lewis Carroll's Alice books, Through the Looking Glass, Alice in Wonderland. So young Alices who are jung. Jung in German means young, but it's also an allusion to Carl Gustav Jung, okay? J-U-N-G. And easily frightened. It could mean frightened. So freuen auf, freuen sich, freuen auf, they all mean become happy. So it could mean frightened, become happy, And it is also an allusion to Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. Now, another example from Finnegan's Wake, where you feel the plurisignificatory potential of language. Listen to this again very carefully. Mehi corpora, mehi corpora, mehi mix and mass corpora. So corp in Italian means to beat. So on the surface, this is a passage in Finnegan's Wake about wife beating in Dublin. But look, listen to this again very carefully. Mehi corpora, mehi corpora, mehi mix and mass corpora. It also echoes something, the prayer in Confiteor at the Catholic Mass. How does it read? Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, meaning through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Now, how does deconstruction help in research? How is deconstruction important for research? Hillis Miller says, J. Hillis Miller was originally a phenomenologist, but later he was bowled over by deconstruction and he became an ardent votary of deconstruction. And he said, and I quote, deconstruction is not a dismantling of the structure of a text. I repeat, deconstruction is not a dismantling of the structure of a text. It is a demonstration that it has already dismantled itself. So what do we do in research? The finding is already there, right? The finding is already there. So we can apply this finding to more and more texts. Now, if you ask me, I would say that literary research has fallen into a state of stagnation. So while I was doing my PhD, I was asked to read up on a certain author to learn about the trends of practical criticism during those days. Okay, so 15 years ago, and it has not changed much since then. So when I read up the sample literary criticism pertaining to one author, later I found that it is true of criticism in general. So I found that 75% or 3/4 of literary criticism says one of these things. These three statements have become the cliches of literary criticism. And you will find these everywhere because these are cliches. They're done to death. So what are these three cliches? One, meaning is undecidable, which has come to us from deconstruction. Two, all literary texts are entangled in discourses and politics of race, class, and gender. There's a second cliche. And the third cliche is some concept or the other is a social or cultural construct. So we are told that gender is a construct, sexuality is a construct, nation is a construct, disability is a construct, everything is a construct. Heck, literature itself is a construct. So these are the three cliches of literary criticism. And it has led to some kind of deductive reasoning in literary criticism and literary research. So why do I say that? We begin with this ready-made assumption, we apply it to more and more texts. So that's a kind of deductive reasoning. You know the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning? So inductive reasoning is moving from the particular to the general. Deductive reasoning is moving from the general to the particular. So you say all human beings are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Socrates is a human being. Therefore, he is mortal and will die. So this is, and you can say this of every human being. This is what happens in literary theory, literary research. So you have some ready-made finding, and this finding is replicated ad infinitum to more and more epochs, more and more authors, more and more texts. This is one reason for stagnation in literary research. Now, what is the case with deconstruction? Deconstruction is slightly different because each deconstructive reading is different. It is unique. Now, let us see how does deconstruction relate to other schools of literary theory. For example, Marxist criticism, feminist criticism, psychoanalytic criticism, post-colonial criticism. Now, these are all, barring deconstruction, these things, these schools of thought, or these schools of theory that I mentioned, Marxist, feminist, psychoanalytic, post-colonial. In fact, Harold Bloom calls these schools of resentment because they contest some discourse, right? So feminism contests patriarchal discourse, assumptions of patriarchy. No, in fact, one of my favorite feminist jokes is this. You might have heard this somewhere. A man without a woman is like a fish. Sorry, a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. So the sense is that a fish does not require a bicycle, woman does not require man. So feminism anyway contests a particular discourse. Similarly, Marxism contests the discourse of capitalism, unravels the underlying class relations, class politics. Postcolonialism contests the Western colonial constructions of the East and other politics associated with that. So how are these schools different from deconstruction? Remember, deconstruction can be used as an aid to, Abirlal Mukhopadhyay has made a lighter statement. Yes, the opposite is also right. Very true. Must be true. I mean, you can have your take on that. Okay. So we are looking at the difference between Marxism, feminism, psychoanalysis, and postcolonial criticism on the one hand, deconstruction on the other. Now I said deconstruction can be an aid to all these schools of criticism, but deconstruction is slightly different. Now, how is it different? Now I put it this way. Deconstruction plows the very ground on which any statement can be made or unmade. And as such, deconstruction has a meta-level significance. Deconstruction can be applied to any of these schools themselves. So, for example, if you take this idea from feminism, in feminism, one strand of feminist thought says that femininity or gender is a social construct, right? But if that idea is carried to its logical conclusion, then if you say that gender or womanhood or femininity is a social construct, then people can ask, then what about all the struggles which are launched in the name of this social construct, right? That is why, in fact, feminist thinkers have responded very cleverly to this. In fact, they have come up with a concept called strategic essentialism, otherwise called pragmatic essentialism, right? In order to wage these struggles, in order to wage these battles, you need these tentative constructs. So they have come up with strategic essentialism or pragmatic essentialism. A critic called Naomi Shore has used this phrase, strategic essentialism. Gayatri Spivak has used this in her, Spivak, as Nandita rightly says, Spivak has used this. So the play of concepts need to meet certain pragmatic roadblocks. Yeah? Let's move on with this concept of textuality. We have a new concept of text, and those who are interested in the idea can read Roland Barthes' essay called "From Work to Text." So, what is a work? What is the difference between a work and a text? According to Roland Barthes, a work has a finite meaning. Its meaning is finished. It's decided by the author. It's a finite thing that you can actually hold in your hand. It's a finite entity. But a text is a free play of signifiers. So do you know the etymology of the word text? The English word text, you can actually respond to my questions in the chat box. Do you know the etymology of the word text? The English word text is derived from Latin texere, meaning to weave. It's an infinitive. Texere means to weave. So the word text is a past participle. It means woven. So text is a free play of signifiers. So in our research, what do? Do we deal with literary texts as works or texts? Do we deal with books as works or texts? Now I would say we use a combination of these two. Under the work mode, we look at authorial intentions or authorial meaning. We look at the historical meaning of words. We also look at the historical context. for the historical meaning of words, I'll give you an example. This from Raymond Williams's Resources of Hope. L.C. Knights, the famous Shakespeare scholar, was teaching at Cambridge, and Raymond Williams was sitting in class. So L.C. Knight said, nobody today, that's during those days, understands the meaning of the word neighbor as used in Shakespeare. The word neighbor in Shakespeare means a lot of mutual obligations, close connections, communitarian obligations, mutual obligations. Today, many of us live in flats or apartments, and we live in a condition of what is called urban anonymity. We do not know who is living in our adjacent apartment. We don't know whether the person is alive or not. It's the condition of urban anonymity. But that is not the case in Shakespeare's time. And Raymond Williams stood up in the class and said, I understand what the word neighbor says. Why did he say so? He said so because he came from the working class milieu of Wales. And in that milieu, families, neighbors are bound by a sense of mutual communitarian obligation. And he gives this example. If there is an emergency in a household and you don't have the time to do laundry, you don't have the time to wash clothes, you keep the bundle outside and your neighbor will go, take it, wash, and keep it back. So I usually say in the class that this does not happen, unfortunately, in our hostels. So it is that sense of that the word neighbor has a historically specific meaning. So in the work mode, we look at all these historically bound ideas and factors. So historical meaning of words, historical context of words, and also authorial intention or authorial meaning. Yeah, but a text, I will respond to these things at the end, okay? So remaining questions so the remaining questions I will respond at the end. So I just need 10 more minutes. After that, I'll respond to your observations and questions. Yeah, so a text is a boundless entity. It is subject to the free play of signifiers. In other words, a work is archaeological. A text is futurological. And in actual research, we combine these two modes of dealing with a book. But as I said earlier, deconstruction is not merely literary theory or literary criticism. And I said that Rodolphe Gashe has called Ulysses Gramophone the property of philosophy. Now, I want to make a claim here, true to the title of today's presentation. I want to make a claim. Excuse me. I want to say that deconstruction represents the auto-epiphany of Western thought. Epiphany is a theological term meaning manifestation or revelation, that is the appearance of God in the created world. But James Joyce gives a secular meaning to this word. It merely means manifestation or revelation. An ordinary object is capable, object or a scene or a person is capable of an epiphany. So epiphany basically means manifestation or revelation. Okay, it is derived from the Greek verb epiphanein, means to manifest or reveal. My statement is deconstruction represents the auto-epiphany of Western thought. Now, what do I mean by that? I want to postulate something called a world process. The sum total of all that is happening in the world, which includes thinking, acting, conceptualizing, articulating, all those things, making connections between ideas. What we are doing now, this is part of the world process. And this world process has three trajectories. One, developments in the natural world. Two, the world process has a historical trajectory, historical developments, but also our personal trajectories. So natural, historical, and personal trajectories. It's quite a lot, isn't it? So that's why I say this world process is intricate. It is complex. It is unwieldy. It is proliferant. It is never ending. And what we have in knowledge in the humanities in language is only an abstracted version of this world process. Now, what deconstruction does is that it shows a gaping gulf between our world comprehension or world theorization in language and the world process as such. The world process is characterized by an excess. So it is unwieldy, as I said. So it cannot be fully grasped within language using our cognitive mechanisms. So I repeat, deconstruction has revealed a gaping gulf between world excess and world theorization. All right. So as such, it is a climactic problematization of the Western attempts at world comprehension, which have carried on through millennia. You know, the world process is quite complex. It's prolific. It is unwieldy. So we have tried to understand this complex, unwieldy world process in terms of single concepts. In fact, gods and deities, religions are an attempt at understanding this complex world process with the help of a single entity or trope. Gods, for example, God controls everything. A single entity. Remember, the human mind is a cognitive miser. And we have tried to understand the world process in terms of single entities or tropes. Not only religion. This endeavor has extended to modern philosophy. Friedrich Hegel, another German philosopher, has tried to understand the world in terms of a concept called absolute spirit. So it could be identified with reason or God. So history and the progress of consciousness, both these are the unfolding or outworking of the absolute spirit. Arthur Schopenhauer, another German philosopher, tried to understand the world process with the help of something called will, or all striving, all our activity, all our striving. Remember, the Buddha tried to understand this world process and the world of human activities with the help of four truths, right? Four noble truths. All earthly life is full of sorrow. All earthly, and what is the source of sorrow? Desire is the source of sorrow. And desire can be averted, and sorrow can be averted by giving up desire. And desire can be averted by following the noble eightfold path, the Ashtanga Marga. What is this Ashtanga Marga? Right belief, right aim, right speech, right effort, right living, right intention, right attention, right meditation. Bergson, Henri Bergson, another French thinker, tried to understand the world process with the help of something called élan vital, meaning the vital impulse. Oswald Spengler, the author of The Decline of the West, which became very popular in Germany after the defeat in the First World War, tried to explain the world process in terms of the inner historical directionality of cultures. He posited 8 cultures, and each culture has a historical direction in which it moves. Right. So people have tried to understand the world process in terms of a single entity or process. Why? Because our cognitive mechanisms, because our language reveals certain limitations. Deconstruction has shown us the gulf between our attempts at world comprehension in language and what is called world excess. Right. Now, I want to wind up with looking at some implications for deconstruction. Okay. So Derrida wanted to deprivilege certain privileged terms in binaries, speech and writing, for example. Remember, he is not attempting to invert the hierarchy. Now, there are social hierarchies also. Will things become better if we invert the hierarchy and people who are at the bottom of the hierarchy at the top of the hierarchy? Derrida is not attempting that. Derrida is showing us the untenability of hierarchies and structures themselves. Right. So he did this play with many concepts. So I mentioned pharmacon. So center. So in fact, The concept of the center is dependent upon the concept of the periphery or the margin. So one term is dependent upon another. Okay, so can we really say that, if you carry that thought as logical conclusion again, can we really say liberal democracy is privileged, fascism has been deprivileged, shall we bring back fascism? So it's not irresponsible free play that deconstruction is asking us to do. It's not irresponsible free play. In fact, I like a certain phrase that Derrida used in one of his last works. It is called rogues. Okay, it is published in 2003, based on his lectures in 2002. So rogues, 2 essays in reason. And he uses a certain phrase, responsible guardians. Remember, responsible guardians. So it is not irresponsible free play. We are asked to be responsible guardians of the spirit of deconstruction. Remember, it does not stop with one person, Jacques Derrida. There are the American deconstructionists, Paul Deman. In fact, Paul Deman has actually spoken about the relationship between Nietzsche's thought and deconstruction. Another American or Yale deconstructionist, Barbara Johnson. Right. So the spirit of deconstruction, we should be able to carry on the spirit of deconstruction. So it's not irresponsible free play. We are asked to be responsible guardians. Right. What deconstruction has given us is a culture of perpetual self-questioning. I repeat, deconstruction's greatest legacy is a culture of perpetual self-questioning. Now, many in the academia say there are these new ideas which emerge to question or challenge or contest certain entrenched oppressive ideas. Now, these new ideas themselves have become orthodoxies. So a friend of mine used the word canonical subverters. So he was referring to Derrida, Foucault, and many other theorists and critics. So these new ideas have also become orthodoxies. Shouldn't we challenge them as well? Yes, we should. Right. So when we look around, we see that this is another orthodoxy. Okay. So this is based on reports from the field, based on my own experiences in the academia. So we find that often skepticism is mistaken for critical intelligence. So people, if you ask somebody, do you like that movie? Do you like that particular book? People are always critical because often skepticism is mistaken for critical intelligence. In order to study something, we must also be believing in something. We must also be liking something, right? Now, people are hesitant to say that they enjoyed or relished anything because skepticism is mistaken for critical intelligence, and that has become a new orthodoxy. So if we carry deconstruction to its logical conclusion, we should be questioning the new orthodoxies. We should be questioning ourselves. We are capable of doing that. We are capable of metacognition. We are capable of asking ourselves, why do I think like this? Why do I hold this particular perspective or view? So we are capable of metacognition. And if we exercise metacognition, we will be able to be true to the spirit of deconstruction. So in fact, fidelity to deconstruction, Derrida is acting against the spirit of deconstruction. If we are deconstructive, we will carry that spirit even beyond the proponents of this theory or this school of reading, right? So I'll stop here. I hope you understood at least a major part of what I said. And if you have any observations or questions, so I shall be glad to respond to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jibu Matthew George, sir, for such an engaging session. May I now request Professor Arun Mandal, sir, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of English, Bakura Christian College, to conduct the interactive session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Devopriya. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Jibu Matthew George, for that extremely engaging and illuminating session on a very difficult topic, derivation construction. We have a number of questions. The floor is now open for questions, observations, and interactions. Some have already posted questions on the chat box, so I'm going to read those questions one by one, sir. The first question comes from Kandita Nandi, who asks that a text can be bounded within margin, but a word cannot be. It has a larger aspect. Is it right, sir?
Yeah. But if you
can I respond? Keep themselves muted, please. Except Dr. G.
Yeah, I can read the questions in the chat box, but it seems that your voice is breaking. Whoever asks a question from among the audience, you can be as loud as possible. So first I'll respond to the question that Dr. Mandal has read out. Yeah, text can be bounded within margin, but a word can't be. It's a larger aspect. Is it right, sir? So remember, if we follow the terminology of post-structuralism and deconstruction, it is actually the text that is unbounded. It's work that is finite, particularly in Roland Barthes' terminology. Work is finite, text is boundless. But I get what you're saying, right? Yeah. So it is not merely a problem of semantics. Yes, even if we don't subscribe to these terms or these distinctions, we can of course say that there is a certain aspect of a book which is unbounded because it is a product of language. So it is unbounded. It is limitless. You can derive any kind of meaning from it. Meanings can be read in, meanings can be read out. So there's one aspect of it which is boundless, as I said, futurological. Another aspect is bound, it is limiting. So in the vocabulary of post-structuralism and reader response, work is that word for the bound aspect and text is a word for the boundless aspect. Yeah, but we can use alternative terminology. Yes.
Professor Devi Prasad Vishwa asks, would you
yes, sir.
Derrida's concepts of aporia and trace? Secondly, how are Derrida's ideas different from Paul de Man's concepts?
Yes. First, aporia is a gap or an indeterminacy in a discourse, right? So there are gaps and indeterminacies which make it impossible for a text or a discourse to arrive at a stable meaning. Now, trace is an interesting concept. Remember that many of these words have multiple meanings in Derrida's system or non-system, okay? So trace, see, I'll give you a practical example. You want to write a poem on the moon, on the beauty of the moon, right? So there are many others have written about it. There is this vocabulary at our disposal. And when we start writing a poem, and when we read it, and when our readers read the poem, there are many other things which we have avoided. We have made. Suppose we want to use a feminine metaphor for the moon. Other poets might have used other metaphors, but we make a certain choice of vocabulary, and when the reader reads. The reader chooses a certain concept in order to understand this text, but the word that we use, our choices are haunted by what we have not chosen. What is present to us is haunted by an invisible trace of what is absent. So trace is the influence of the absent upon the present. So when we use a word in reading or writing, our usage, our choice is haunted by what we do not use, right? So trace, in one sense, trace is the influence of that absent entity or concept upon what we have actually chosen, what is present in our hand. Yeah, so regarding my own sense is that Derrida and Paul de Man developed their concepts independently. So Paul de Man, migrated from Europe. He had a Nazi war background, and he went to the US, and some of his ideas. But if you want to have a comprehensive understanding of the process of deconstruction, you have to go to Derrida. So Paul de Man, I would say, is a secondary reading. I will tell you, there are some convergences. There are also some divergences. To slip into the autobiographical, I'll give you an example from my own, days as a research scholar. See, this idea occurs in Paul de Man's book called Blindness and Insight. So, I told my professor that romantic poets can be divided into two categories. So, on the one hand, you have these earlier romantics, that is Wordsworth and Coleridge, who always look back. They are retrospective poets and prospective poets. Prospective poets are the later romantics. So Shelley, Keats, and Byron, they always look forward to new happenings. No, it's not entirely true. Keats also speaks a lot about the past, the classical ages, antiquity, and so on. So I found that you have this distinction between the earlier romantics and the later romantics. So when I later read Paul de Man's works, I found that de Man has made this idea. One way of distinguishing between Derrida and Paul de Man is that de Man locates these ideas, or de Man makes his prognosis with regard to a linear history, and Derrida does this in a piecemeal manner, but of course engaging the longer history of thought. His work on Rousseau, his work on Pharmakon, his work on Heidegger, Levinas. In fact, I forgot to mention something. My one reason for coming up with this thesis on world excess vis-a-vis world conceptualization, the world excess as something that exceeds our attempts at world comprehension in language. So one reason for that is that Derrida was working on Emmanuel Levinas, and this whole idea of something exceeding your comprehension can be found in Emmanuel Levinas. I'm talking about Emmanuel Levinas's idea of totality and infinity. The other, Levinas is one of the best profound philosophers of the other, and the other philosophers of the other being Martin Buber and to an extent Jean-Paul Sartre. So Levinas wrote a book called Totality and Infinity. He wrote another book called Humanism with the Other. So the other is always infinite. Your totalizing structures cannot really grasp the other in its infinity. So Derrida was working on an essay on Emmanuel Levinas prior to 1964. And that essay is called Violence and Metaphysics. Within 3 years of this essay, Derrida's magnum opus came out. 1967 was the Annus Mirabilis, meaning the miracle year, or the great year for Jacques Derrida. It came out, it was in 1967 that these three major works came out: Writing and Difference, Speech and Phenomena, otherwise called Voice and Phenomenon, and Of Grammatology. So this idea of something exceeding your attempts at comprehension, your attempts at capturing something in language, that I would say has been anticipated in Derrida's work on Levinas called Violence and Metaphysics. You don't find that kind of deep engagement with the philosophy of the West in Paul de Man. Okay, shall we move to the next?
Yes, thank you, sir. The next question comes from Debolina Gupta. She asks, if you can elaborate on oral narratives in relation to phonocentrism that you talked about in your lecture. Also, if you can talk about Blanc.
Let me find that question. You mean Debolina Guha Takurta?
Right, sir, right.
Right, yeah. So highlight on Derrida's concept. Okay. Oral narratives in relation to phonocentrism. Yeah, I hope that idea of phonocentrism is quite clear. The West, according to Derrida, has this habit of privileging speech over writing. So how do oral narratives figure in this? If you go along with the Western traditional understanding of orality and writing, now you have this concept called orature, right? So PhD students, researchers can work on oral text as well. Literature literature etymologically means, it comes from the Latin word litera, meaning letter. So literature is basically something which is written. So in order to circumvent that etymological problem, today we have this concept of orature. Now, if you go along with the traditional Western notion of an oral text, in the theological context, those oral narratives have only one meaning, right? Because logos, you remember what I said? Logos means both an utterance and the meaning of an utterance. And in the case of divine oral utterance, these are identical. They cannot be separated. And Derrida has actually caused a disjunction between the two. So if you go along with that idea, you will have to say that oral narratives have only one meaning. But that's not correct, right? If you look at oral performances, they're all improvised. Each time Homer would tell a story, it's a different story. So similarly, in the Indian context also, oral narratives, they are improvised. I was reminded of something which Salman Rushdie said, the traditional Western idea of a narrative is the beginning, the middle, and the end. But that's not how stories are told in India, particularly the oral performances. And a typical transplant of this phenomenon into writing is Raja Rao's Kantapura. Okay, so what happens in that typical oral performance is, the narrator begins with the story, then he cracks a joke, he connects the story events with some contemporary happening, then he breaks into a song. So it is a very opposite of Western ideas of narrative, because it's a kind of heteroglossia. It's a kind, to use Mikhail Bakhtin's term, it combines everything. It's a potpourri, right? So oral narratives are also capable of this plurality of meaning, right? So we have actually to depart from Derrida in order to see that. Right. So we move on to the next. I hope I have answered the question.
The next question is put by Professor Anindo Shen, who quotes Keats and says, poetry should surprise by a fine excess and not by singularity. Do you find any resemblance between this and the excesses of the world processes you mentioned?
Sure, yeah. Okay, thanks for all these questions. Poetry should surprise by a fine excess. Excess of meaning, yes. Excess of experience, yes. And not by singularity, yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. Our aesthetic enjoyment itself is a function of the excess that we find in a text or work. But let me also mention another idea. What is a canonical work? What is a classic? Harold Bloom, a critic of traditional persuasion, says that a canonical work is known by its singularity. Right? And these are his words. When you enter the world of a canonical work, you do not meet a familiar person. You meet a stranger. So the capacity to surprise, the capacity to give you the unique and the singular, that is the criterion for defining a canonical work or a classic. Yes. Regarding the resemblance between this and the excess of the world process, yeah, the point of resemblance is that the excess in the work is a function of the excess of the world process. That is a point of resemblance. Yeah, but I was talking about a larger philosophical idea, attempts at world comprehension as such, on which thinkers around the world have devoted a lot of time over millennia, not just centuries. So I mentioned people from Greek philosophers who use this idea of logos, other pre-Socratic philosophers used other concepts. For example, apeiron, A-P-E-I-R-O-N. Then Empedocles, on whom Matthew Arnold wrote the poem Empedocles at Etna, he used this concept called friend. And we moved to the modern concepts such as Hegel's absolute spirit, Bergson's Elan Vital, Schopenhauer's will. There is a larger philosophical understanding of the world process. Now, at the back of all these is what's called process philosophy. Ian Whitehead proposed something called process philosophy, as opposed to understanding the world in terms of substances. So there is substance philosophy and process philosophy. So the connection between that larger world process and what Keith said, the point of resemblance is this.
Thank you, sir. Professor Shen puts another question there itself. Who will educate on what is responsible free play and what isn't?
Yeah.
Who will adjudicate? Sorry. Who will adjudicate?
That's the $1 million question, right? No, I would say the time when teachers could adjudicate and tell students, you can go till here and not beyond that, those times are gone, right? So now this is a time of individualism in literary criticism as well. If you ask me the reader's point of view on this, he would say all understanding is misunderstanding or misperception. So you can have a free play, but there is an opposite point of view. According to deconstruction and the general post-structuralist thought, all we have is these markers on the page. Is that language, or does it become language only when readers approach it? So that they are, dormant entities. The signifiers on the page are dormant entities till readers approach the text, this field of signifiers. The opposite point of view that I had in mind is an idea proposed by Stephen Knapp and Walter Ben Michaels in the book called Against Theory. So they give this interesting, realistic example of certain words appearing on the beach sands. So you go to the seashore and you see the words written on the seashore. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. Wordsworth's words. If those words are accidentally caused by the seawater, you cannot call it language. But if, on the other hand, there are extraterrestrial creatures sitting in a boat far away and say, oh, see, those humans have made some meaning out of what we have written on the beach sands or the seashore, then that is language. Language without intention is only, the signifiers, the field of signifiers without intention is only a semblance of language. It becomes language only we have intention. This also applies to readers responding to text. Till readers approach the text or the field of signifiers, it is dormant. So they become concretized only when the readers read it. So adjudication is out of question in this new intellectual climate, I would say.
Thank you, sir. We will take 2 more questions. Sandeep Shamajdar asks, Jacques Derrida referred to deconstruction as a radicalization of a certain spirit of Marxism. Why did Derrida refer deconstruction as radicalization? Was Derrida very much influenced by Karl Marx? They were both philosophers. That's the question.
Yes, it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting question. was Derrida? You see, many of these thinkers emerged out of certain intellectual climate. So France, during that time, after the war, so there was a certain kind of education. So there were these symbols of authority. Now it is said that open reading, free play of signifiers, free reading on behalf of readers, students, that was very much there in the Anglo-American academia. But in France, it was still conservative. Literary studies was still a conservative discipline. There was a fixed literary history. There were canons of reading and interpretation. So into that ambience, you have a lot of influences coming. So Marx was certainly one among those influences. Remember that this is also the intellectual climate out of which structural Marxism emerges. Now, as far as deconstruction Marxism are concerned, these two streams of thought were addressing different problems. Marx, if you want to make the right sense of Marx, at least the traditional Marx, the orthodox Marx, so Marx is actually inverting Hegelian dialectic. Hegel said, all phenomena in the world, economics, political systems, legal systems, literature, art, all are part of the unfolding or outworking of the absolute spirit or reason, a consciousness. Marx comes and says it's the other way around. So political systems, legal systems, philosophies, art, literature, these are all a function of your material conditions. It's the other way around. That's why we often say Marx stood Hegel's dialectic on its head. So Marx's problem was different. He was coming up with a dialectical interpretation of history. Derrida's main problem is the metaphysics of presence. The fixed, unbreakable bond between language or discourse on the one hand and concepts, what he calls the metaphysics of presence. The problems they were addressing themselves to were different, but there are conjunctions, there are overlaps. The spirit is more or less the same. The spirit is more or less the same. In fact, historicizing Derrida is a further task of deconstruction. I have many more things to say on that. But I think the time is limited. Yes, there are. I think you can see the relation between the two as some kind of a Venn diagram. We had these Venn diagrams in school and early college. So there are overlaps, there are divergences. The spirit is the same, but they were addressing themselves to. Derrida was also influenced by that spirit. Yes.
Let me take the last question, sir.
Hello. Sir, Professor George, one observation that in a work that is Spectrum of Marxism by Derrida, in that particular work he actually says that Marxism cannot be compartmentalized into these or that, and so Marxism is a changing phenomena. So if we consider into that work, then Derrida is also a Marxist, as China is a communist country in a new sense, or
yes, very true.
Or as we can now interpret Hamlet, that Hamlet is not suffering from procrastination, but he is constructing or explaining or rather new interpretation of courage by applying that work of Derrida, the Spectrum of Marxism.
Yeah.
So if you kindly look into that.
Yeah, thanks for that witty observation. I would put it this way. Marx is deconstructive, but Marx is not only deconstructive. Derrida is Marxist, but not only Marxist.
Thank you, sir. Let me take the last question that was about to.
Yes.
We are already testing your patience, I know. If you will kindly describe Derrida's, it's put by a student. If you will kindly describe Derrida's concept of difference, I shall be thankful to you. And the next question is, she quotes Motte and says, we need to interpret interpretations more than to interpret things. Does this epigraph throw significant light on Derrida's structure, sign, and play? That's it, sir.
Could you repeat the last sentence?
Yes, of course, sir. Of course, sir. She quotes Mote, and the quote is, "We need to interpret interpretations more than to interpret things."
Yes.
Unquote. Does this epigraph throw significant light on Derrida's structure, sign, and play in the discourse of human sciences?
Yeah. So let me respond to the second question first, then return to the first. Yes, as Derrida's thought deconstruction is more about interpretation of interpretation rather than interpretation of things. Very true. That is why I said deconstruction has a meta significance. And even hermeneutics is not about particular interpretations. It's about the founding principles or fundamental principles of interpretation. So it has meta character. It is unlike any other school of thought. And I mentioned Marxism and so on. Yeah. The second question, that would be a direct answer. So explain difference, right? As I said in the course of the talk, diffference, difference is a portmanteau term. It combines difference and deferment. Okay, yeah. So difference, it has a Saussurean background. So in the Saussurean context, meaning is differential. That is, one word means something because it's different from other words. So meaning is a function of differences within an internal system. Derrida adds the concept of differing or deferment. So meaning is not only different, but it is also it is also a matter of deferment. So meaning is endlessly postponed. Defer means to postpone. So the portmanteau term difference combines these two ideas. So meaning is both differential. It is also a matter of postponement of meaning, so that you cannot arrive at a determinate stable meaning, and all texts are subject to a free play of signifiers, endless play. It signifies in multiple ways. Yeah, I hope I have answered. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Now over to Devopriya. Devopriya, are you there?
Yes, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Arun Mandal, sir, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of English. Now may I request Professor Shipojyoti Karmakar, sir, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Bakura Christian College, to formally conduct the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Devopriya. Thank you, Dr. Jibu Matthew George, for such a brilliant and engaging lecture on Derrida and deconstruction. Theory is always considered as very arcane, obscure, and esoteric, as they are based on continental philosophy and integrally related to psychoanalysis, history, politics, social science, and cultural studies in general. Post-structuralism or the Derridian deconstruction belong to the metaphysical tradition of European philosophy, and hence students face obvious difficulties in understanding them. But sir, your lecture has bridged those gaps of incomprehensibility. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I also humbly acknowledge the participation of the huge number of faculty members of different institutions, research scholars, and students over Google Meet and YouTube. See you tomorrow. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jibu Matthew George. Thank you so much for responding to our invitation. So on my behalf also, I express my thanks. I convey my gratefulness to you, sir. Thank you so much.
So with this, we call it a day today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure being with you. I see that there are many interesting questions in the chat box. You can call if you want to, There are a lot of people calling up and asking things or making observations. Yeah. Thank you once again for having me on.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.